Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to the 12th Annual Mahatma Gandhi Media Lecture. My name is Robin Sulal, and it's my privilege to be facilitating proceedings on this rather auspicious occasion. To get the ball rolling, it's my privilege once again to call upon Professor Sibusiso Moyo, the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, Innovation and Engagement at the Durban University of Technology, to warmly welcome you. Prof. Moyo.
Good morning, Program Director. Thank you so much for the introduction, and a special good morning to everybody who's with us today. It does give me great pleasure to do the welcome, but I just want to check with Mr. Sander if we have, can we start right away, or do we wait a few minutes, Program Director?
No, I think you should go ahead, Prof. It's fine.
Okay, good. All right, so yeah, a special good morning and a special welcome to the 12th Annual Mahatma Gandhi Media Lecture with a theme that talks to the need for journalism in nation building by Jerome Cluster, our guest speaker for today and founder of the Cluster Trust. So I acknowledge all protocols of our esteemed partners, community members, duty council members who are present, the management of the university, staff and students, and especially also our corporate affairs division and all those who have helped to make sure that we have this lecture today. So the lecture, of course, is brought to you in a trio partnership with the Gandhi Development Trust. So I must also acknowledge Ms. Ella Gandhi, I hope she has joined us, the Phoenix Settlement Trust, and the Cluster Trust as well. As we have this dialogue, let us spend a moment of silence to just pray for those who have been impacted upon, infected, or are sick from the virus and other ailments. I know there are many amongst our staff, students, and community members who've been affected in that way, and those also in our communities and country that have also been adversely affected by the impact of, our recent unfortunate incidents that touch on violence and looting and social upheavals which we have seen in our region and country. So I just want to ask our program director through yourself, if we can just have a moment of silence for a minute, and then I can continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay, program director, I will continue now.
That's fine, Prof.
Thank you. So thank you so much, colleagues, for that. So that we just continue as well. So our duty engagement framework, part of this series of engagement for us as a university, is embedded within our engagement framework, which is premised on duties in Vision 2030 and the values that we talk to through that strategy. We talk about being transparent, being honest, having integrity, respect, and accountability. With our commitment to being fair, professional, compassionate, and excellent. So we know as a university, we are located within a community. So it is important for us really as a university we can't just turn a blind eye to, where we find ourselves in our region. We want to have impact within our region. So I do see this platform of engagement as one of the areas which is helping us to engage at least on some of the current issues that are happening, and also trying to find solutions. Because remember, universities are about knowledge production, skills building, skills training, and also building communities. So this platform helps us to engage on these critical issues. So I want to start off, of course, by quoting Nelson Mandela, who talks first about the importance of education, and then the link between education and nation building. So one of the quotations that I like to refer to says that without education, your children can never really meet the challenges they will face. So it's very important to give children education and explain that they should play a role for their country. And then the one which is very common, which everybody talks about, is about education being the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And from the poorest of countries to the richest of countries, education is the key to moving any society. However, in Africa, where we find ourselves, and especially in our situation, the link between education and economic development, and also addressing violence and some of the socio-economic upheavals we see, is still a mystery to many of us. However, what goes unsaid is that, in fact, we have learned over the years that bad education is just as much the most dangerous weapon we can use against social and economic development. Every child born into this world does not come into it with a bias. They are not born. In fact, when you are born into this world, you have no racial bias, you have no xenophobic bias or any bias. Every child is born free. But what happens between birth and when they grow up to become, active citizens in our regions, countries, is still a mystery, again, to many of us. I guess we know, there are many studies which show how the environment, the community you are brought in, the facilities, access to information, what opportunities that can bring to building your skills and careers. So we know that early childhood development plays a big role. In fact, and I think this is an area in our community, both in our province and our nation, and also a continent and world at large, where there's a critical, area where, as universities and educational institutions, we need to play a big role. So it makes a difference between citizens who become active citizens in a positive way, or irresponsible citizens. So for me, I see that this early childhood development and the role that universities can play is also very important, even though we seem to attach ourselves only to the high-end product after people have, gone through the schooling level, their youth days, and then we try to change them later on, which is probably working on the wrong end. But we just need to make sure that, when we have these deliberations, we really think about what are the underlying issues. So to our journalists, I see journalism as a powerful tool that we can use to educate, communicate, and build relationships, communities, and also insist on accountability. So as co-hosts of this lecture, we look forward to hearing our guest speaker and yourselves, of course, as part of this dialogue in efforts that we can use to give better meaning and understanding to what has happened now, what is happening, and where we want to be and where we want to go. So I want to take this opportunity, without taking too much time, to really thank the organizers, our program director, Advocate Sula, for facilitating this session, our guest speaker, and all of you who are attending. I believe it gives us a great platform for us to engage, understand where we are currently, and also understand the role that journalism can play in building up strong communities that are resilient. And also making sure that we have places which our communities and our members can all thrive and achieve their goals, as well as contribute to economic development. We cannot ignore the inequality situation in our region. I know that when we talk about the Gini coefficient, we are one of those countries that are highly affected. And all these things are things which, our journalists, I believe, together with other stakeholders, can bring to the fore and make sure that we are discussing, not just, having discussions which end up in policy only, but also activism, which makes sure that we're active and making, applied solutions and really trying to do practical things which can help us uplift the rest of our communities as well. So thank you so much, Program Director. That is all from me, and best wishes to all of us as we engage in this session. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Prof. Moyo, for those powerful opening words. Very much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeremy Thompson, the former senior news anchor at Sky News, in his foreword to a recently released book titled The Reflections of the South African Media, 1994 to 2019, says false stories spread faster and more widely than real news. A study discovered that the truth takes 6 times longer than fake news to be seen by 1,500 people on Twitter. Jeremy adds that falsehoods and conspiracy theories take a long time to debunk. The challenges to the mainstream media have never been bigger. It is against this background that today's topic is so very relevant. Before I introduce you to our guest speaker this morning, I want to invite you to pose your questions in the chat box while our speaker is doing his presentation. But can I urge you to keep your questions short, simple, and to the point? And I would ask you to avoid comments so that we can get many questions in as possible so that our speaker could respond to adequately. Thank you very much. Jerome Cluster is a public speaker, founder, executive director, and board member of the Ugly Cluster Trust. The trust is in honor of Ugly Cluster, the late former editor of the Sowetan newspaper and a high-ranking community builder. Ugly Cluster, who I must say I had the privilege of knowing, rose to prominence for his nation-building projects that gave real hope to broken communities. The Ugly Cluster Trust attempts to pursue projects to achieve social justice and self-pride. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my deep honor to introduce you to our guest speaker this morning for the 12th annual Mahatma Gandhi Media Lecture. The topic, the need for responsible journalism in nation building. Jerome Cluster, thank you for heeding our invitation. It's all yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Seolal, and thank you, Professor Moyo, as well. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I am honored and delighted to deliver the 12th Mahatma Gandhi Media Lecture hosted by the Mahatma Gandhi Development Trust, the Phoenix Settlement Trust, and the Durban University of Technology on the need for responsible journalism in nation building. When Advocate Robin Seolal and Dr. Ella Gandhi invited me to deliver this lecture, I honestly was terrified. I thought to myself, I'm not a journalist, I'm not an expert in journalism, and I'm not an academic either. But I still felt that it was important for me to accept this invitation and to contribute to our discussion on the need for responsible journalism in nation building. Because nation building, in its nature, is an inclusive process. It requires all kinds of people from different walks of life to come together and share their ideas, experiences, knowledge, and skills. It calls for ordinary South Africans to take up the responsibility of changing things for the better into their own hands. Furthermore, I'm of the impression that a discussion on responsible journalism should not only take place in newsrooms, amongst journalists, PR practitioners, advertisers, media executives, academics, or business people. We must create a space where all South Africans can speak with each other freely about issues facing journalism and nation building. Because responsible journalism does not happen in isolation or in a vacuum far removed from society. Responsible journalism is an integral part of nation building. So I am grateful to the Durban University of Technology, the Phoenix Settlement Trust, and the Mahatma Gandhi Development Trust for hosting this very important event and for inviting me to engage with future journalists, the journalism fraternity, and society at large on this key discussion today. I've spent the past 5 years or so searching for my father, Agri Cluster, pouring through his columns and articles, interviewing those who knew him personally and those who admired and loved him from afar, to get a better sense of who he was outside our father and son relationship. My mission has been to try to get a better understanding of the worlds that shaped him and the thinking behind his famous nation-building idea in order to continue his legacy. With the help of a handful of respected trustees, my family and I have established the Agri Cluster Trust, AKT in short. The idea is to keep Agri Cluster's legacy of nation building alive and to push on with his moral vision of rebuilding the broken down structures in our communities that have been shattered by apartheid. On my journey, I have been extremely fortunate to sit at the feet of a number of seasoned journalists from different generations, some from my father's esteemed peers and some from a generation or two from his era. I know that they are helping me, guiding me, mentoring me, because they loved and respected my father. Today, I'll be sharing some of the wisdom they have imparted on my life with you. The recent eruption of violent riots and rampant looting that saw countless businesses nationwide destroyed and some torched to the ground are redolent of the past. It brings to mind the turbulent 1980s, when many influential voices in the political organizations called for the people to make the state ungovernable. In an attempt to break the spirit and the back of the resistance, the apartheid government responded with brute force and called for successive states of emergencies. There was also a dramatic slowdown on the economic growth, worsened by the pressure from the international community to move South Africa towards democracy. All hell broke loose in townships all across the nation. Billows of thick black smoke wafted over townships like Sharpeville, Sebokeng, Boipatong, Soweto, and other similar settlements countrywide. The anger and desperation of the oppressed black majority reflected itself in the violent protests. The air was filled with the choking smell of tear gas and burning human flesh. The world watched in horror as the infamous method of torture and murder, called the necklace, gained popularity even amongst schoolgirls and schoolboys. South Africa was in a serious state of crisis. It was at this time that my father, Agrit Cluster, the famous journalist and crusading editor, initiated his groundbreaking nation-building philosophy at the Sowetan newspaper. He questioned the wisdom of burning everything to the ground only to inherit a wasteland once liberation came. He took to his Sowetan column titled On the Line to challenge the state media on how it had continuously failed to report fairly and truthfully on historic events that had gutted Black communities. These events included the Sharpeville Massacre on the 21st of March in 1960, the Soweto uprisings on the 16th of June 1976, the infamous Black Wednesday on the 19th of October 1977, and the explosion of violent protests in the Vaal Triangle from the 4th of September 1984. After each violent outburst that further crippled Black communities, the state media and the security police would lull the concerns of the white community with the false notion that everything was under control. It was through his column that Agrit Cluster gradually unpacked the reasoning behind his great idea, as he called it. He openly debated the merits of nation building, urging South Africans to start the rebuilding process immediately, rather than waiting for liberation. He fielded countless questions and tough criticism from all corners, including from his readers, academics, and various political leaders. He was even questioned by the security police about the intentions of his nation-building program. Many in the Black consciousness movement and anti-apartheid political organizations wrote off the concept as a liberal fly-by-night scheme that sought to divert their attention from the real struggle. Agrit Cluster responded by stating that nation building is not an alternative to the orthodox political movements, but simply a toolkit to prepare even those in the political struggle to perform even better. As a journalist, voracious reader, and someone close to his community, he was well attuned to the mood in the country. He could sense that unless something was done quickly, there would be another violent explosion in the country that would lead to a wasteland. His speech at the nation-building launch on the 21st of October in 1988 at the Sherwold touched on this unsettling feeling in the atmosphere, stating that there is therefore a holding of angry breath in the Black community. It is probably unconscious, but I can feel it in my bones. There is a silent preparation from Blacks for the next inevitable explosion. Quite clearly, somebody must do something to stop this madness, or at least cushion the blow when it will fall. Operating from the Sowetan offices that were located at 61 Commander Road, Industrial, west of Johannesburg, Agrit Cluster used his editorship as a platform to champion his nation-building philosophy. Alongside his Sowetan colleagues, such as Ntate Sam Mabe, he sought to affirm the best and brightest in his community and rekindle self-pride through initiating various community-based projects and competitions under the nation-building banner. These competitions and awards included the Community Builder of the Year Awards, Guardian of the Year Competition, Educator of the Year Awards, and the Entrepreneur of the Year Awards, amongst many others. Under Cluster's editorship, Sowetan not only reported on the lives of the oppressed Black majority and their plight, but it played an important active role in finding solutions to the problems plaguing these communities. His speech at the Nation Building launch and the Nation Building Manifesto were published by Sowetan, and the Nation Building program was allocated its own column, edited by Ntate Victor Mitsumeri, which ran for 23 years. In her thesis, titled Merging the Black Press with Mainstream Newspapers in Post-Apartheid South Africa, a phenomenological study of journalists at Sowetan newspaper between 2009 and 2012, trades unionist and veteran journalist Anna Majavu states that, however, the influential cluster won the Sowetan staff and public over by linking the Nation Building program to Sowetan's role as a Black newspaper practicing advocacy journalism, stating that Sowetan's primary aim was to lead the way in repairing the damage apartheid had wrought on the structures within Black communities across the country. Shortly after being released from prison in 1990, President Nelson Mandela visited Agri Cluster at his home in Diepkloof, Soweto, south of Johannesburg. When he later became the first democratically elected president of South Africa, Tatu Madiba took a page from Cluster's book on nation building to foster social cohesion and tolerance amongst the peoples of South Africa. Madiba paid tribute to nation building on its 10th anniversary in 1998, stating that it required profound vision for the Sowetan to conceive its nation-building program, and the nation-building program has done our nation a service. Agri-Cluster's legacy of nation-building and ethical journalism are prime examples for the critical need for responsible journalism as a catalyst for peace and social change to improve the lives of our people. History, it seems, is repeating itself. Our country is grappling with yet another grave state of crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic has further worsened the problems we already had in our society. It has further increased the inequalities in our economy, education, and health systems. And our media industry is facing an existential crisis as well. In addition, the fabric of our nation's moral fiber is in tatters. The recent spike in the number of cases related to gender-based violence, femicide, and the abuse of children is alarming. The various commissions of inquiry into the gross abuse of power and corruption by the public and private sector have become a regular feature in the news. Nation building is needed now more than ever. It's eerie how 33 years after my father delivered his nation building speech at the launch of nation building in 1988, that I can feel this holding of angry breath in the Black community he spoke of. There is an unnerving feeling that something terrible is about to happen, something big. It is palpable in the air. It's this silent preparation from Blacks for the next inevitable explosion, he described back then. In my community, at Mdeni Extension 2 in Soweto, south of Johannesburg, I can feel this rising tension and this anticipation for the next inevitable explosion. The violent looting we recently saw was preceded by the sporadic attacks on small businesses owned by African nationals, and I fear that the pressure is mounting. Something must be done soon to address the desperate situation of the poor and marginalized in our country, if we are to escape the wasteland. There is a desperate need for responsible journalism to amplify the voices of the poor in rebuilding our communities. In his speech at the inaugural Agri-Cluster annual colloquium last year on the 19th of October, hosted in partnership by the Agri-Cluster Trust, Sowetan, WITS, DM5 Incorporated, and the South African National Editors Forum, SANEF, to commemorate the infamous Black Wednesday, Dr. Joe Tlole stated that there must be a serious introspection into media ethics to ensure that media is in favor of the downtrodden. It is important for journalists to stand for the poor, the suffering, against the powerful. That should be the foundation of media ethics. Without journalists, the ordinary man on the street will be forgotten. And delivering the 10th Percy Koboza lecture last year, seasoned journalist and former press ombudsman, Professor Pippa Green cited Bill Kovach and Tim Rosenthal's book, The Elements of Journalism, which spells out the key elements that distinguish journalism from other forms of communication. Amongst these, she mentioned the most important to her as being the following. 1, journalism's obligation is to the truth. 2, journalism's loyalty is to all citizens, not just the wealthy and literate. 3, verification is the essential discipline of journalism. Methods are objective with multiple witnesses or sources. 4, its practitioners must maintain an independence from those they cover. And 5, it must serve as an independent monitor of power. Journalism's obligation to the truth, which Professor Green refers to, brings to mind the profound words of the iconic liberation and spiritual global leader Mahatma Gandhi. He stated that the press is called the fourth estate. It is a definite power. It is definitely a power, but to misuse that power is criminal. I am a journalist myself, and I shall appeal to fellow journalists to realize their responsibility and to carry on their work with no other idea than that of upholding the truth. It was this obligation to upholding the truth that inspired courageous journalists and editors such as Joyce Sikhakhane Rankin, Helen Nondando Jabavu, Maud Motanyane Welsh, and Ruth First to expose the nefarious activities of the apartheid regime. At a time when we are celebrating Women's Month, while ironically dealing with the war South African men are waging on its women and children, it would be amiss for me to overlook the gallant struggle for equality and liberation over injustice and tyranny by these remarkable women. They left an indelible mark in the history of our journalism and society at large. They have paved the way for trailblazing journalists and editors such as Pharrell Hafeji, Nwabisa Makonga, Mahlatse Mahlase, Mapula Nkosi, Mary Papaya, Mandy Rousseau, and many others who have taken up the baton in the modern-day crusade for the truth and gender equality in a society that is increasingly becoming more hostile towards female journalists. While Section 16 of the Constitution plays an important role in protecting the freedom of expression in our country, it is also up to ordinary citizens to protect our journalists. Sadly, the carnage visited on women in our society is reflected in our media industry. Sowetan editor Nwabisa Makonga stated in her speech at the 2020 Agri-Cluster Annual Colloquium that the attack on journalists, especially female journalists, has an erosion effect on society. It creates a situation where nobody trusts the media, and this is dangerous. To me, it is clear that the more women are undermined, harassed, silenced, and attacked in the media, the less diverse and weaker our democracy and nation becomes. Advocate Robin Seular's recently published book titled Reflections of the Medium from 1994 to 2019 shares more light on this scourge of gender inequality in sports journalism. Former senior reporter at the Citizen newspaper and the head of public relations and communications at Hawaii Consumer Business Group South Africa, Avashni Moodley, notes that it has been a challenging journey for women in the sports journalism industry, as this sector has always been dominated by male journalists. It's only in recent times that we have seen female journalists being integrated into covering and reporting on male-led sports. This gender inequality has been driven over centuries by a patriarchal society, which many cultures subscribe to. Women in society continue to fight gender equality and have to work twice as hard to get recognized in most male-dominated industries. The struggle for gender equality in journalism is a societal problem which thwarts the process of nation building to all our detriment. It must be uprooted with the contempt it deserves in our society. I, however, am hopeful that things are changing. I am particularly inspired by the group editor-in-chief of Eyewitness News, Mahlatse Mahlatse's words when she was quoted in the Christian Science Monitor on the 7th of August 2020. She stated that, "I want my son to grow up in a world where he has female bosses. I want him to grow up listening to women experts on the radio, hearing them as contributors to changing the world and not just as victims of an unfair system. I too want my sons to grow up in that world. I want them to understand that they are not any better than their sister simply because they are males. Responsible journalism can help us get there. It can drive this important message to our sons, brothers, uncles, and fathers." There have been significant successes made by responsible journalism in the advancement of nation building in our country over the years. It is responsible, fearless journalism that exposed the evil of apartheid to the world. The extraordinary investigative journalism behind the Bethel potato farm scandal and the dehumanizing ukutawusa at the apartheid post offices in Johannesburg immediately come to mind. It is responsible journalism that has brought us the inspirational stories and images of Lillian Ngoyi, Helen Suzman, Francis Bart, as they marched alongside 20,000 women to the union buildings in Pretoria to protest the infamous past laws being extended to women. It is responsible journalism at the Sowetan that championed the nation-building philosophy in the late 1980s, seeking to prepare the nation for liberation. It is responsible journalism through its loyalty to the citizens that steered the nation during the 1994 election and the 6 national and provincial elections since, educating the people on the election process, providing accurate information about the various political leaders, their parties, and policies to enable voters to make informed decisions when casting their votes. It is responsible journalism that upholds our democracy and protects our human rights. It is responsible journalism that has brought us the colorful and unifying images of the 1995 Rugby World Cup and the FIFA Soccer World Cup in 2010. It is responsible journalism that has led us to the Zondo Commission on State Capture, facilitating the process of holding those in power to account. It is responsible journalism at community level that continues to entertain, inform, and educate our communities on matters affecting their everyday lives, such as unemployment, service delivery, housing, and healthcare. As our nation seeks to rebuild its shattered economy and life-giving structures in the wake of COVID-19, we will look to responsible journalism to help us rebuild our nation. Educational programs on TV and radio will help us teach our children from home. Storybook inserts from our newspapers and magazines will help us read to our children in order to cultivate a strong and healthy culture of reading and learning in our communities. Community radio stations will inform us on the latest in how and where we can get vaccinated. Profiles on local entrepreneurs in our newspapers will help us to understand the devastating effects of the recent lootings on small businesses and the lives of all those who are employed by them. We will continue to look to responsible journalism at community level, whether on the airwaves, on our TV screens, in our newspapers and magazines, or through online platforms to play a vital role in amplifying the voices of the poor, suffering, and marginalized by reporting on the problems plaguing these communities. Yes, there are definitely some critical concerns, some critical areas of concerns that affect responsible journalism when it comes to issues around media credibility, disinformation, fake news, and media sustainability going forward. But I believe that responsible journalism will help us navigate this era of disinformation and fake news by helping us verify and filter information from social media platforms with professional journalism. To me, it is abundantly clear that nation building is impossible without responsible journalism. I'd like to close off by quoting the world-renowned novelist, award-winning journalist and columnist, Fred Khumalo, from Advocate Seolal's book, Reflections of the Media from 1994 to 2019. He stated, "The struggle we fought is not in vain. As a writer, what I can tell you is this: for as long as there are human beings on earth, journalism will never die. It will mutate, yes, it will move to other platforms, but it will never die. Journalism is about stories, and people cannot survive without stories because they themselves are stories." Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Jerome. My eternal gratitude for such a powerful presentation, very thought-provoking, and I suppose it gives a lot of us in the media industry to think about, but not just to think about, but to act upon your words of wisdom, your pearls of wisdom, I should add. Thanks indeed. I'm now going to invite Kiru Naidu from the Gandhi Development Trust to moderate the next section on the Q&A. Kiru? Kiru Naidu, are you with us? Okay, while we're waiting for Kiru to join us, are there any questions that you have? You can put it into the chat box. Kiru? Okay. Okay, thank you. Sorry, the administrator, I think Terence, can you unmute Kiru Naidu, please? Kiru, are you unmuted? Terence, is Kiru unmuted? Thank you.
Yeah. Yes,
Kiru, you can go ahead. Kiru, Kiru, can you hear me?
It's still muted on this side. If somebody can unmute him.
Yeah, I think you are.
All right. Greetings, everybody. Robin, can you confirm that I'm being heard?
Yes, you are. Thank you, Kiru.
Right.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you kindly. Please, on behalf of the Gandhi Development Trust, let me recognize and greet Mr. Cluster.
Kiru, we've lost you. I can't hear you.
It's just that we've had between the 12th annual lecture. Right. I'm all right again now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Robin, may I proceed with the questions that I've been monitoring on social media and the chat?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
The first question, Mr. Cluster, is there a contradiction between an active role for
It seems like we're having problems with Kiru connecting with us. Jerome Cluster, while we're waiting for Kiru to rejoin us, you speak so eloquently about gender equality. Can you just elaborate on some specifics that we could actually engage in to ensure gender equality? I know you gave the example of sports journalism, but are there other areas, so to speak, in the short term that we could actually apply our minds to in the media industry?
Thank you, Dr. Robin. I think it's quite important as well to note that the problem that we're looking at in the journalism fraternity or in media when it comes to how journalists are treated is a societal problem. It's what's happening already in our society. And I think it's important that we fight the scourge through making sure that we are able to have women in powerful roles also in the media industry as well. And we also need to make sure that whenever there's an attack on female journalists, that we as a nation stand up to that and bring a stop to that. We must take to the streets if it means we must take to the streets to protest against such. Our voices must be clear that you cannot touch female journalists. And I think that, again, as a country, it is something that we need to make sure that we address with alacrity. Because as I mentioned, that once we strike at women in the journalism fraternity, we are also decreasing the number of voices and decreasing diversity in also our society. And it is critical in our democracy to make sure that we have a diversity of voices. So I think the most important thing is to also make sure that we challenge media houses, publication houses, that we must also hear from experts when it comes to COVID-19, when it comes to financial matters, when it comes to health and education. We need to hear from them as well. And it cannot continuously be experts from males that are being represented in our community, because we want our children to grow up in a society where women are respected as well. But we must reflect that in our society. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerome. Kiru, are you back with us?
Thank you, Robin. May I come in with a question from the social media?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mr. Is there a contradiction?
Kiru, we're losing you again.
Seems to be a challenge today.
Yeah, there seems to be a challenge. Prof, you had your hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
No, I was going to say. Okay, now I was going to say, Program Director, there are questions in the chat and comments, and I think Professor Kruger, for example, I've just picked from the board.
I've got that. Yeah. Maybe I should go to that. Prof. Kruger, once again, welcome to the Faculty of Arts and Design. Nice to have you on board. She states that it seems as if society is being enabled and encouraged to turn on each other instead of focusing on the cause of the destruction of our social fabric. How do we ensure a calm spirit amidst the apparent political will to create chaos and hatred? I'm also thinking of spectacularized xenophobic attacks. They seem to be linked to the current situation. Jerome?
Thank you, Dr. Robin. I think here what we also need to think about when we speak about nation building is what exactly is nation building? Nation building at its core is caring for others. And we need to start thinking about this principle that brings everybody together, this spirit of nation building that says, we are not interested in what political party you come from. We will work with everybody. And we need to also look at leadership that is not only in the political arena, or only in business, in our communities as well. And I think once we do that as well, we'll be able to clearly identify those various forces that are trying to, I would say, use people or influence people with their own secret agendas in order to put us against each other. Because once we realize that, we will also realize that nation building requires all of us to work together. And I mean, I think the golden rule is something that always we have to keep in mind, that you should do to others what you'd like them to do to you. That is what nation building is based on. It is based on the principle of Ubuntu. And I think it's important for us to do away with the factions, similarly to what Untitled Chapter was preaching back in the late 1980s, when there were many different ideologies, and he was expected to choose a side. And things became very difficult for him because he did not choose a side. He wanted to see all parties coming together and working on rebuilding our country. I think we can revisit that philosophy, and I think it can work quite well for us when it comes to this dividing spirit that we find in our nation. I think another thing that we've noticed with spectacles like the Rugby World Cup or the Soccer World Cup or the Cricket World Cup is that people want to be part of something bigger. People want to be part of a force that looks to how do we rebuild our country. And I think nation building can provide that platform quite well. And I think revisiting how it was also implemented by Untitled Chapter and his team at the Sowetan can be quite beneficial for us. Thank you.
Thanks for
Robin,
that.
if I may come in with a question from social media.
Yes, Kiru.
Yes, I'm sorry about the glitches on my side. A question, Mr. Cluster. Is social media overtaking
If I heard Kiru correctly, is social media taking over the truth?
Wow. I know.
Sorry,
I hope you got the better part of that question.
No,
about...
We didn't quite get it.
Is social media overtaking traditional journalism?
Oh, traditional journalism.
I don't think so. I think, yes, traditional journalism has a lot to do and has a lot to look at and changing in order to adapt to the current climate. I think what technology has done is just made information move from one point to the next point much quicker. But I don't think that it has done away with journalism, responsible journalism, that is. And I think it is a great example using Professor Green's citation of Bill Kovac and Tim Rosenthal's book, Elements of Journalism. Because when you look at social media, it doesn't allow for that filter or that verification process that professional journalists are trained to do. So I feel that what needs to happen though in society is that we need to have media literacy programs that we run out in order to empower our people to understand the power that they have and to also understand and manage their media platforms well. I think it is important to have that culture of nation building in our society. So before someone posts something, to ask themselves, does this contribute towards nation building? Or is this going to defame somebody's character? Or is this going to bring someone down? So I think we need to look at ourselves as individuals, but I also think that we can look to the professional journalism industry to assist us in verifying the information on social media. Yes, social media can be useful, but let us not make sure that we always verify the information that we get there. And we have journalists who are trained in this verification process who can help us through that. So I don't think that social media has taken over traditional journalism. I think there will always be a need for traditional journalism, as Ndade Khumalo has stated. It's just changing, and it is also moving to different platforms. But I think journalism in that sense, responsible journalism, will always be needed in our society. Thank you.
Kiru, are you there? Jerome, while we're getting Kiru back, or trying to get Kiru back, you spoke about amplifying the voices of the people. And so, in a sense, it's about the media trying to amplify the voices. But how do the various people in society, how do they go ahead amplifying their voices?
Well, I think social media does help there as well, because I mean, nowadays, anybody with a cell phone can post a message on social media. But I think, again, it is in how we send out our messages that is important. And I think that community radio stations, for example, they are a perfect example of how the media is amplifying the voices of the people, because they allow people to speak on that platform about problems that they are facing in their communities. And I think that we need more of that, where people are also profiled, ordinary South Africans are profiled to tell their stories on the ground about what is happening, so that we have a process of making sure that we understand that statistics, or the human faces behind statistics, so that we can see that human element of the problems that we are facing. And I think another important thing is that something that Dr. Tami Mazwai mentioned last year at the colloquium was that we need to have in the media industry a campaign that is always looking at how do we make sure that the problems of the people are always highlighted, and not only look at the elite society and their lifestyles, but look at critical issues like the unemployment rate, like the number of South Africans who are living under 1,200 Rand per month. Those are critical issues that we need to look at. And we need to always remind our people, our society, about these critical issues. And that is how you give a voice to our people, by making sure that journalists on the ground are engaged with the people, by making sure that our journalists as well are having discussions with people in their communities as well. I think it's important also to build that trust and to build that media credibility, where journalists and the people are free to exchange ideas and are free to engage with each other when it comes to critical issues in their communities as well. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerome. Kiru, are you there?
Thank you. Yes, Robin. I'm paraphrasing us in here. Define responsible journalism in a context of media ownership dominated by historical patterns of race and class. I hope I haven't mangled the question, but that's essentially.
Thank you. Thank you, Ndate. Thank you, Ndate Naidu. I think
ownership patterns.
Sure. I think we will always have in our society this history of race and class. And I think it's important to make sure that we address that in all industries. But I think, again, when you look at the media industry, it's important that we push the transformation of making sure that the ownership is also reflective of the population itself. And that is why we need to make sure that we have more female journalists in top positions in the media industry. And we also need to make sure that we have people of color, that are Black people, also in reflected in the top management and ownership of the media industry. And I think when we also speak about that journalism being independent, responsible journalism being independent, it also speaks to the individual as well. How the journalists themselves would approach a story in having that sense of independence, or that spirit of independence when it comes to their own gender, their own race, their own religion, and how they also report on stories. It is quite important that they maintain that independence. And I think that it can help us to go a long way when it comes to nation building and how we look at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerome. Kiro?
Yes. Another question. Is there a contradiction between an active role for journalists and an independent role that you speak of?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a difficult question. I think I would also ask Advocate Silal to assist in answering that one. But I think when you talk about an active role, I think that the best example to give would be if you would see a child starving, for example, you would not only, responsible journalism says that you cannot just only report on that and be far removed from that and distance yourself. You also have to have some empathy and some compassion. And that is what we're talking about having an active role. Report on the story, but in a compassionate manner, in an ethical manner, in a manner that also has this sense of ubuntu. But of course, making sure that it is factual and it is truthful as well. And I think that when we also speak about independence, we are not saying that we should just be reporting on stories without any bias, because journalists are human beings. They will have that a bit of bias. But of course, there's also those methods that journalists can use, which I hope Ndate Sola will maybe expand on, which can help in making sure that the methods that they use themselves are not a bias, and the methods that they use are objective in their work, and not looking at the journalists themselves being as independent in that sense. Thank you. I think that answers it.
Kiro?
Just one more question here of the social media, Robin and Dr. Cluster. You talked about being hopeful about South African journalism, and beyond the quote that you've used, what makes you hopeful, especially with the young crop of journalists that are so dominant, especially in the broadcast media?
Well, I think I am hopeful because I am seeing a few more voices than we had in the past, as young as I am, of course. But I mean, I listen to young journalists, young people on the radio like Thoriso Maloka, and I listen to Mahlatse, I listen to Nwabisa Makunga, and I myself am inspired by their work. I'm motivated by their work, and I can also see the impacts that they have on young girls growing up. Now, as the Trust, we also do some work in high schools where we go out and speak to young people and try to encourage young people in order to make sure that they are reading more, so that we can be able to have future leaders who are knowledgeable, future leaders who understand nation building. And in our engagements, we meet a lot of young girls who you can already see that they're inspired by these great icons. Because another thing that we use is that we used to use my father's articles in order to teach young people through their English and literature classes. Just looking at Agri Cluster's themes in his columns and those that are relevant to today that you wrote about back then. And in our discussions, I am quite hopeful to see at the young talent from the young women, even at that stage in high school.
Do you have any further questions, Kiro? No. Jerome, there's a question here from Hashila Narsi. What has been the role of the media in promoting the narrative of the Phoenix massacre? And does such a narrative represent responsible journalism?
Well, I think here I'd ask you, Professor Advocate Solal, to please assist in that one.
Well, I suppose at the end of the day, it's a question of reporting the facts. I think I've said it time and again, facts are sacred, opinions are free. And until we get to really the bottom of that issue, we won't be better informed, or should I say, until we have that kind of a response and knowing the facts, we'll continue to be ill-informed. And hopefully through the court cases, through the inquiries that are now being set up, hopefully we'll get to the facts. But I must add, we still require the media at all times to act in a responsible way. You made the point about biases. Yes, we can strive for objectivity, but objectivity is something that it eludes us because of our backgrounds and because of our value systems. So it's important that the media industry, the media workers are mindful of that point and ensure there's balance, there's accuracy, and there's fairness. Unfortunately, I've seen some of the reports emanating from what is taking place, not just in Phoenix, but other parts of the province as well as in Gauteng, where there has been an element of irresponsible journalism. So I hope that kind of that's it. But it's a point that we can continue discussing down the line. Okay, I just want to get back here to Professor Kruger, the incoming Executive Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Design. And she says it was interesting that community radio stations were targeted in the recent attacks. This provides a lot of food for thought about underlying causes of the situation and agendas. You want to elaborate, Jerome?
Thank you, Ndade Silal. Yes, I think Professor Kruger touches on a very important point, also looking at what has happened in Alexandra with their community radio station there. I think what's important as well is for our people to understand, our communities to understand that our journalists and these platforms that they have are for us. They are there in order to protect our human rights and our democracy. If you destroy a community radio station, how can that platform amplify your voices and tell your plights and move government in order to make sure that you have that service delivery, in order for them to make sure that they report on violations on human rights? I mean, how will you find out information? How will our grandmothers, our uncles find out information about their vaccinations or their clinics and their appointments in their clinics, and important factors that look at our local schools as well? So to destroy a radio station is similar to just doing away with a weapon that the people have. So as people, we must understand that radio stations and the journalists, that we must protect them because they assist us and protect us, of course, as well against the powerful, or at least that's what they should do. But I mean, in the case of the Alexander radio station, it was heartbreaking to see. But I feel that we need to have a space or create a platform. I'm hoping that it is a project we can look at with the Durban University of Technology, where we can go into the communities and also start to educate our people, inform our people about the role of journalists, about the role of these incredibly powerful platforms for them, to assist them in their everyday lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerome. The point about community radio is very interesting, and it was just not the community radio stations in Johannesburg. By the way, it's an issue that I'm closely following. There's also a radio station in Umlazi in Durban. But what's interesting about this issue of the community radio stations, I vividly picked up the point about, so to speak, the relationship, or should I say the support from the private sector. As you would know, Jerome, Alex FM got an air soon as possible through the efforts of LM Radio. In other words, LM Radio had given them some space and later on some assistance in getting back on air, I think the very next morning. So I think that's an important point. And maybe you just want to talk in short about public-private partnerships between communities and the private sector.
Yeah. Those partnerships are crucial. I mean, to give an example again with the nation building program in the early 90s, when the big business got involved in nation building, it gave nation building a very powerful platform and a very powerful voice that was able to assist people. So just simply put, you need the money. You need the money in order to do community work, community projects. You need the money in order to make sure that our people, as rights are protected, our democracy is protected. And so these partnerships are very, very important. And these partnerships are the partnerships that also help us in making sure that the guys in the private sector, the guys with the money, are also planting back into the communities that help them to make their profits as well. So it is quite important for the corporate culture as well. It makes it a healthy corporate when it does have social corporate responsibilities that it works with. And I think, again, I mean, I must just go back to the part of also the journalism fraternity and those in the media space engaging with the people, because we cannot have, as I said, I mean, there's this tension that I feel that's rising in our community. We cannot have another violent explosion that happens in the country. And if we do not engage with people on the ground, that is exactly what's going to happen. We need to make sure that people on the ground are part of that discussion between the public and the private sector as well, so that they also have a role to play in this investment, that they too must be part of that investment that the private sector makes, so that they too know that they have a stake in the game, so that they too know that when, for example, LX FM is rebuilt again, or radio stations in Umlazi, as you mentioned, are rebuilt again, that we don't have in 6 months' time another attack. I mean, if malls are rebuilt again, just for example, now in the country, and we have not addressed the critical issues at core, they will be destroyed again. We need to go to the ground. We need to make sure that we have those engagements with our people. And they must be part of that partnership that you just spoke of, and that they still are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Barlin makes a point about your comment on ethics in journalism. You may want to elaborate briefly on ethics in journalism.
I think the part of ethics in journalism as well is a part that Ndade Tlole has spoke about quite well, where he speaks about making sure that those in the journalism fraternity as well as journalism or responsible journalism should also make sure that we are always on the side of the underdog, so to speak, making sure that they are there to protect the poor, the suffering against the powerful. It's that role of as a watchdog for society. But I mean, these ethics, again, they touch on making sure that journalists themselves behave in a way which is reputable, and they don't bring the media fraternity into disrepute. And I think it is such an important part that we need to look at. How do we respond to those journalists who go outside of that? How does the press council respond to that? How does it respond to the regulatory bodies that are there to assist? And how do we also look at those who don't fall within those bodies or have not opted to be within those bodies? How do we regulate that? I think it's a very, very important part, because what we don't want the government stepping in to say that they will help with that process, because then, I mean, alarm bells should be going off for us. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Prof. Moyo, our DVC, poses the question: what community educational programs can be run in collaboration with some of our NGOs to educate our people, and looking at opportunities for entrepreneurship as well, not just in terms of starting a business, but identifying gaps and how to fill these in creatively or through providing services?
I think starting off with educational programs, at the Ugly Cluster Trust, we are running a reading program. And what we've done, what is unique about our reading program is that we are reading to children online. And we are asking South Africans, ordinary South Africans, to send us their reading videos where they read to children. And we feel that this will also help us to cultivate a culture of reading in our communities, where ordinary South Africans taking the time to read to their children or just read on their phone and sending us the videos and on our platform so that we can share it. Because it's been reported that, I mean, in South Africa, there's a huge number of children from age 1 to about 4 years old who have never had a parent read to them. And so if we want to foster that culture of reading and learning, if we want to have a strong future South Africa, we need to make sure that we are reading to our children. Another program that we're looking at bringing back is the Early Childhood Development Program. So I am glad that Professor Moyo spoke about ECD and how DUT looks at engaging in the ECD sector. We're looking at bringing back the Early Childhood Development Awards, which was initially started by the ECD Congress for ECD, Early Childhood Development, and APSA. And so that program looked at how do we celebrate and identify those doing exceptional work in the ECD sector? How do we go to those ECD centers as well who are struggling and show them and give them opportunities of mentorship and give them those role models from the ECDs that are doing well? And how do we look at the new techniques and methods used in educating children in order to make sure that those are shared with those that are struggling as well? And I think it's important to use that platform as well to maybe bring in the DUT in that competition that we look to hold as well. And soon we will also be running a competition where we are asking South Africans to bring us their reading videos in order to foster literacy. But we want to incentivize South Africans by giving a little something per week, whether it's a prize of 500 Rand or 1,000 Rand, that allows them to at least also address the financial needs because of the crisis that we're facing right now. But at the same time, make sure that we are cultivating that culture of reading. And I think another important thing I'd like to mention is that my father, if you speak to anybody who knew him, they will tell you he was always carrying a book. And I found this to be true with Dr. Tammy Mazwai. When we go into meetings, we see that he's always carrying a book. And that's an important message that it sends to people who are just looking at you. Without even just reading the book, by just carrying the book, it sends a very important message that our people are reading. So we need to have images like that are trending on social media. We need to have a fashion of people who are reading, a trading fashion of people who are reading in our communities. And what we also think when it comes to the entrepreneurship part, we're looking at creating partnerships with professional bodies that will assist us not only in accessing funding for small businesses, but also ensuring that we have mentorship opportunities for them. So once they do access the funds, how do they manage then their risks and their assets properly and effectively? Thank you.
Thanks, Jerome. May I add, your dad didn't only carry a book around, he always had a writing pad and a pen in his hand. Always making notes, and I have those kind of fond memories of him in that sense. Jerome, I'm just gonna invite anybody else who wants to ask a pressing question, but while we're waiting for that, I just want to kind of reiterate the point that you made. Nation building is needed now more than ever before.
Yeah.
Can you just want to say a few words on that as we come to a close?
I think it's undeniable that our country is in a crisis. I mean, the examples that I've made previously, it's the looting that we've seen, it's the abuse on women and children that we've seen. The media industry in itself is facing a crisis. So we do need nation building. And I mean, I love the way that nation building was structured in the past, where my father and his fellow colleagues at Sowetan, they sought to make sure that it had a holistic view at how do you develop every single aspect of a human life's progression or development. I mean, they had the ECD awards that looked at the infancy stage or the early childhood development stage. And then they had and of course, that looks at the foundation stage as well. And then they had the Young Communicators Awards, that looks at leadership within young people. How do we make sure that young people who are doing great work are also put in a platform that they are celebrated as role models for other young people out there who are not maybe doing as well. And they also had a wonderful project. I mean, the Garden of the Year program, which looked at how do we make sure that areas like Soweto and other townships across the country are not only pleasing to the eye when you look at them, but our people are encouraged just to clean up their front yards. I mean, I think this is an important way of also building confidence in our people, making sure that our people are seen as leaders, where people are not just only then asked about flowers or asked about growing crops, but of course, when they're seen as leaders, they'll be asked about marital problems. They'll be asked about issues that affect healthcare and education. And it is important to build those community relationships and those community platforms. These competitions can help us to achieve that. And I think revisiting the nation building program can assist us in doing that. And I think we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We already have organizations in our society, civil society, that is assisting in playing this role. We need to find that unifying principle that says that all South Africans are working together. All South Africans have a stake in this nation building process. It is not politically aligned to anybody, and it has private sector, public sector, and everybody coming together. And another important thing about nation building is that it looks at all South Africans from all walks of life, whether it is the gentleman who's a security guard when you're parking your car, whether it is the lady who's cleaning the toilets, whether it is the gentleman who's driving the taxi. All South Africans have an important role in nation building, imparting their knowledge, imparting their life experience. Thank you. I don't want it to be too long in my explanation.
Thank you very much. Before we get to a conclusion, I just want to recognize Peggy Naidu, who early on said, excellent point on verifying before reporting. In the recent riots, it seemed that media added fuel to the fire of racism. Both visual and written reports fueled this. How should a journalist address this? I think, you made some comments about that early on, and I did make some comments, but if you just want to add to that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think when you look at those key elements that Professor Green spoke about, that sense of independence, that spirit of independence that looks at how do I'm not a journalist, making an example. How do I, as a journalist, report on a story without being biased towards my own race, towards my own ethnicity or my own religion? How do I objectively tell a story in that sense is quite important as well. And I mean, again, it goes back to this notion, this principle of Ubuntu that, of course, nation building is inspired by, is that how do I want my legacy to be? And I, as an individual, the way that I also interact with my society, how do I see myself in relation to my community? How do I identify my role that I'm playing? I mean, as a journalist, you have a lot of power. Journalists have a lot of power, and they need to make sure that they use that power responsibly. And I think that it is quite upsetting, unsettling, that you do have those ghastly situations that you've mentioned. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And finally, Jerome, any concluding remarks? Parting words?
Well, thank you, Ndate. Well, I mean, I think we've summed it up quite nicely. The time for nation building is now. And I think that even in this discussion, I'm already picturing a lot of partnerships moving forward, collaborations moving forward on how we can practically implement this nation building within our communities. But again, I mean, nation building does not exist without responsible journalism. And it is up to people like Ndate Robin Silawul and his department at DUT, this journalism department at DUT, up to the Gandhi Development Trust, up to the Phoenix Trust as well, to come together and say, how do we then make sure that the legacies of Ndate Cluster and the legacies of Mahatma Gandhi are also continued, in a sense of how do we create a platform that helps those on the ground in order to achieve their goals? How do we give a voice? Well, not a voice, how do we give a platform to amplify their voices? Because to say they're voiceless is incorrect. They've always had a voice. It's a matter of making sure that we put the mic and we give them access to the mic, or we make sure that they are in front of the camera and their issues are also addressed by the medium. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Jerome. Very, very inspiring, and I think lots of food for thought. And I see a fair amount of collaboration and connection between the Agri-Cluster Trust and Durban University of Technology in the short, medium, and long-term perspective. Thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to call upon Asha Ramgobin, and she's the Executive Director of the Human Rights Development Initiative, which is based in Pretoria. Asha.
Thank you so much, Prof. Sula. After such a rich and interesting, but above all timely lecture and discussion, I have the honorable task of expressing a few words of gratitude and offering a few closing thoughts. So firstly, let me on behalf of the Gandhi Development Trust and the Phoenix Settlement Trust express our heartfelt gratitude to all of you for your participation. We have had participants from all over the world who joined us this morning, and we're delighted that many from our beloved continent, Africa, were also participating. Thank you also particularly to Dr. Balan from India for your participation. We are deeply grateful to the Durban University of Technology. This decades-long partnership has been has seen both the organizations and this lecture evolve over time. We are particularly grateful to you, Professor Moyo, and you, Professor Sulal, the support team led by Vasantha, and the technical team led by Nelson. Thank you particularly for jumping in now and bringing the voices of the participants into the conversation when technology seemed to work against us, Professor Sulal and Professor Moyo. Within the Gandhi Development Trust and the Phoenix Settlement Trust, there are people who make everything happen under the wise guidance of Ila Gandhi, to whom we all owe an incalculable debt of gratitude. We are especially grateful to Geetha, Hershila, Kiru, and Kidar, who are always on call and always ready to help find solutions. It is customary to begin by thanking our keynote speaker, but I chose to rather close today's gathering with an expression of our heartfelt gratitude to you, Mr. Jerome Cluster, for your presentation today, and importantly for your work in keeping the spirit of your dad, Agri Cluster, alive. Having lived through July in KwaZulu-Natal, we will no doubt remember your dad's words that he can feel it in his bones. He can feel the holding of angry breath in his bones. He didn't need sophisticated intelligence to sense this holding of angry breath. He sensed it because of his closeness to people. Thank you, Jerome, for reminding us how important it is to be close to those about whom we write, with whom we advocate, those whom we serve, and for those whom we actually exist. My thoughts go back to the inspiration behind this annual media lecture and to Gandhi's conviction that the sole aim of journalism is service. Gandhiji's pen was one of his strongest weapons. He used this weapon to share stories about the problems, feelings, and aspirations of villages and the otherwise invisible masses. His was a deeply introspective and human approach. He used the newspaper to educate and to mobilize people. As we hear in his voice, and I quote, one of the objects of a newspaper is to understand the popular feeling and give expression to it. Another, to arouse among the people certain desirable sentiments. And the third is fearlessly to express popular defects. Unquote. How synchronous it is, Jerome, that you echoed Gandhiji's warning when he said, the newspaper press is a great power, but just as an unchained torrent of water submerges the whole countryside and devastates crops, even so, an uncontrolled pen serves but to destroy. If the control is from without, it proves more poisonous than want of control. It can be profitable only when exercised from within. Thank you again, Jerome Cluster, for breathing new life into Gandhiji's and Agri Cluster's ideas with your erudite lecture. You looked back and found inspiration from your dad, Agri Cluster, and helped us find the light in our midst even today to help illuminate our path toward tomorrow. In this moment, we celebrate with deep gratitude the renewed, revitalized, and revived spirit of your beloved and respected dad, Agri Cluster, and of our beloved Gandhiji. We reach the end of this session with a deep-seated hopefulness that has certainly erased the despair of July. I'm quite confident that the Phoenix Settlement Trust and the Gandhi Development Trust will embrace your challenge and think about the how questions going forward. I, for one, will take a page from your dad and always carry a book. On that note, I now close the meeting and thank you all once again.
And thanks to you, Asha, for your comments, your concluding comments, and I think you nicely summed everything up. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a special request for you to turn on your camera. I'm told that they want to get a picture of those who have participated. So if you can please just turn your camera on so they can get a picture of you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, my thanks to you. I must also personally thank Ila Gandhi, Geeta Nasi, Asanda, as well as Terence for all the assistance, as well as Jerome in the planning and the preparation of this lecture. And finally, that has been the 12th annual Mahatma Gandhi Media Lecture. Take care and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
From the
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
I mean,